Okay, welcome everyone to Space Data Hackers, the first one of 2024. We are thrilled to be back in action with a great topic set up for tonight. Um, I'll give you the quick rundown of where we're going. Um, ah, clicking too fast. Um, we want to spend a little bit of time talking about Space Data Hackers and Space Northwest. Space Data Hackers is a program of Space Northwest, and talk a little bit about why it exists and the other things that we do. And then I'll hand it over to Abhi Thorat of SAC, who's going to talk to us about cyber resiliency in space. And following his talk and some Q&A, we'll do some community connect just to hang out and talk all things space and data. Um, if you have not already, join the Space Data Hackers meetup. We're on meetup.com. I think some of you have discovered us that way. Share it with your friends if you know folks who are passionate about our future in space and interested in how data plays a part in that. We established Space Data Hackers in 2021 as a place where people who have a love for the subject can connect, meet, do. We have this kind of as an extension of our program. One of the things that Space Northwest does is NASA's Space Apps Challenge Hackathon for Seattle. And I'll get into a little bit of that a little bit later. But Space Northwest itself, I've got the little logo up top here. What is it? Well, we're a bunch of committed individuals who believe that the Pacific Northwest has a unique role to play in our journey to space, and we're here to catalyze it. And we do that through our programs that bring together the diverse communities that make up the space ecosystem in Washington State and beyond. Space Northwest. We do the Seattle event for NASA's International Space Apps Challenge Hackathon. That is a global hackathon that NASA leads every year. Last year, we hit globally almost 60,000 participants. Our numbers prior were like in the 30,000 something range. It was explosive growth last year. And our registrations in Seattle put us in the top 3 sites across the United States, which is kind of cool. We also do a Techstars Startup Weekend that's focused on the space vertical. We did that in December of 22, and we're planning, looking like June of this year for that, where folks who are interested in space as a place to do a startup come together, go through the practice of forming one over the course of the weekend. We have our Space Entrepreneurs Meetup series. That will probably be our first event of the year, looking in the April timeframe. That's an in-person meetup in the Seattle area. And we have this, which we do every month at the end of the month, last Thursday of the month. You'll find us here. Last year, we did for the very first time the Seattle area workshops for the State of the Space Industrial Base. That is a program from the Defense Innovation Unit, Air Force Research Lab, and Space Force in coordination with New Space Nexus, formerly known as New Space New Mexico. We've been partnering with them on that. Fantastic forum to get industry and government working together on the challenges that address our future in space. And there's more. So stay tuned to what we're going to be putting out there for 2024. A lot of cool stuff on the way. One of the things that we launched between our last Space Data Hackers meetup and now is our Alliance program. You can be a part of Space Northwest. The Space Northwest Alliance is our program to bring together folks who are in the industry, supporting it, growing it, to collaborate and maximize the impact that the Pacific Northwest has on humanity's future in space. So go to spacenorthwest.org/membership, or just go to spacenorthwest.org and click the button that says Join the Alliance. And you can also volunteer with Space Northwest. We're always recruiting. We've got a lot of programs, and great volunteers are what makes them happen. Folks who can help with marketing and social media, bringing in and managing sponsorships for our events, planning logistics. If you are really good with space data, there's plenty of folks who would love to have you mentor them on that, and data analysis as well. So you can email info@spacenorthwest.org if you're interested in being a part of that. I am so thrilled that I get to introduce one of our latest recruits, Eric Veal, who's our organizer for Space Data Hackers. Eric, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Sure, yeah, happy to be here. I'm a Northwest native. I grew up with a Macintosh at home, and I don't know, I was thinking about it today. I like the desktop publishing revolution, like I was all about that, and then web after that, and then mobile apps after that, and then cloud after that. And so lately I'm on to AI. So this is just kind of what I do, is I like tech and computers. And so the Space Data Hackers thing for me is just like a cool topic that's interesting, and I'm sure there's plenty of data, so no shortage in that way. But I'm ex-Tableau, ex-Microsoft, and then I'm doing a project now that my project's called AppsJack, appsjack.com, and we have a LLM that trains frontline workers, like new employees. You'd get help from an LLM as you start.
Awesome. Welcome, Eric. Thank you so much for joining in to make Space Data Hackers amazing. All right. I think at this point, I can hand it over to Abhi, our guest of honor and speaker for tonight, founder and CEO of SAC, where he's leading teams that design, build, and secure space systems. So he's going to dive deep into what all of that means. And we'll get a simulation of the ground station system. Am I correct on that, Abhi?
Yes, it is up and running.
Okay.
So we should be able to see something.
Cool. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'll hand it over to Abhi.
Thanks. Okay. All right. So thank you, dear friends. Thursday evening, a little after 7 p.m. I know, right? This is probably so thank you for taking the time, restful evenings. And yeah, as Mike introduced, I'm Abhi Thorat. I'm the CEO, founder of a consulting company called SAC, and we do design, build, secure of emerging applications like autonomous vehicles, and recently it's been space. So I want to thank Mike and the other organizers and everyone to get this opportunity to sort of chat about cyber resiliency for space. And we're going to talk about cyber resiliency through the lens of one of the NIST frameworks, which is NIST 8401. And to make this like more relatable, we will see what does NIST 8401 look like for ground control systems. And so it's going to be a mix of so my objective here is my objective here is to give an overview of the space systems, the cybersecurity, the NIST 8401, and the ground station. So it's quite a bit. So it might be more in breadth, but we'll have Q&A at the end, and so feel free to ask any questions, and be happy to answer. Yeah. So as I said, we'll just sort of go through. This is the agenda, organized in a way to cover all these different topics in varying degrees of depths, right? So we'll talk about the space economy, the need to protect the space assets. What are the threats? What do they mean? What does a typical NIST framework look like? What does a NIST framework look like as it gets applied to the ground stations and such? And Yeah, I just want to get feedback in terms of is the sound quality okay, Mike?
You sound great, Abhi.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about space economy and the growing space economy, right? So what is driving, like what are the statistics, right? So if we look at this visual, and just consider the number of launches that have happened over the last decade, and it's quite it's quite self-evident, right? So 2000 towards end of closer to 2018 and 19, you can see the surge, and it's just gonna trend in that direction. And now let's look at what is the driver, right? So we feel one of the big drivers is cost is always thing, right? You go to Costco, go to buy anything, cost is always a concern. So for any endeavor or any exercise. So and putting satellites in space is nothing different. It's just like more sensitive and more critical. So yeah, if you look at the unit economics of what it has costed to put the payload to be delivered into the orbit, right? Because there's various phases. So these numbers, these statistics are about putting a commercial payload in the orbit, and this is mostly for the LEO. Not mostly, it is for the LEO. It's for the low Earth orbit. And if you see on the x-axis, we have the years, and it's the minimum unit is 10 years, and it goes on increasing. The y-axis is it's the cost per kg, right? Cost per kg of payload. And if you see, it's quite significant drop, right? And as it's dropping, it's almost to the order of magnitude. Like if you see 1980s, it was like 100K, $100,000 per kg to put something, to put a satellite or a space asset up there. To if you look at 2020s, it's gone down to $951 per kg. So yeah, this is it clearly demonstrates that it's becoming more accessible to not just the earlier, right? This as one of my colleagues who's here, so thank you, Warren, for joining, say like Space 1.0 and Space 2.0. So Space 2.0 is so thanks to these parameters, these factors, that's helping. All right. So yeah, the need to protect, if you talk about what's the need, right? So our dependence, not many people realize, is so the user community, right? The people live in cities, not in other areas, rural areas. So communications, GPS, internet, TV broadcast. When you say communications, so the cellular communications critically depend on PNT, which is okay. Hang on. All right, am I connected back?
You're good.
Okay, sorry, there was some disturbance. Sorry. I'll talk about communications, right? So cellular communications are super timing sensitive, and they get their time synchronization from GPSs, and so there's this recent example of right before Russia attacked Ukraine. So they took down their communications networking. They took down their Viasat satellites. They hacked into their ground stations first, and then once that was done, they jammed the satellites, and so the Ukrainian folks sort of lost visibility and communications and such. And and the other factor has been, as we saw, the number and value of the assets are quite significantly going up, right? And so the estimated global economy is, and sorry, I forgot to put the source of this number. I'll find this out. Okay, all right, let's keep moving. Okay, let's talk about what are the threats and the impacts. So again, this So this data, this information is has been borrowed from the NIST publications. So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and I'm very deliberately being focused or oriented around that publication, and so a lot of this has been borrowed from there. Okay, if you look at, okay, so the potential threats, what are the impacts, the severity, and the likelihood, right? So as we said, so from number 1 through number 8, if you look at like number 8 and number 7, so these cyber threats are quite similar to what the enterprise network would have, like any network, like web server, data server, cloud, anything that's hosted in the cloud or on-prem. So, but if you go, like the first 6 are quite specific to satellite communications, where you have intentional jamming and spoofing of sensor data. We will look into, what are the main components of a satellite. So we'll see there's a lot of sensors, and those sensors are needed to keep those satellites safely in their orbit and functioning optimally. So that data that gets communicated from the satellite sensors to the ground stations, it's quite mission critical. It's quite mission critical. So any effect to that data, between the source and destination, however it gets affected, it's going to be quite critical. Yeah. So the second point is, if you have access to that data, then you can manipulate that data, and it will again affect the end user in terms of like positioning, navigation, timing. If that's affected, then everything is going to be off. Even if you take the case of imagery, I don't know how sophisticated the hackers are, but if the imagery is manipulated, then the end user would not get the right representation. And third is, corrupting. So it's a similar. And fourth, fifth, and sixth are, fourth is again denial of service, where you inundate the communications. Fifth is same as 1, but it's only like it's going to affect the guidance control. So your orbits, your satellites may go off orbit, or they might just freaking run into the other satellites over there. 6 is hijacking. Okay, 6 is hijacking and unauthorized commands. So I think this is critical. So as the ground station issues commands to the satellites to keep them in their orbits, or other functions such as turn off, turn on, modulate any settings, so that's done through the ground station. And so if it gets into the wrong hands, or if the hackers get a control of it, then they can send whatever commands they want, and maybe just reboot the satellite and have it get off orbit or just fall off. So so these are quite critical, and it's significant risks. And I didn't go much into the business impact. It's quite intuitive, or it's quite self-explanatory. All right, so if we let's talk about, so we spoke about what at a high level, right? So what are the cyber risks? And now let's talk about the technical architecture. So what we'll do is we'll talk about the technical architecture, then we'll talk about NIST, and then we'll see how all of this comes together, right? So if we look at, what are the satellite components, right? So at a high level, in terms of systems, subsystems, right? At a high level, there are 2 systems, right? So the bus and the payload. So for folks coming from, just like me, from other fields like telecom or enterprise IP networking and such, so this is quite analogous to control plane and data plane, right? So where the bus or the control plane is the system that is responsible for controlling and maintaining the infrastructure itself, and the payload is like the data plane, where you have the user traffic, right? So whatever the mission the satellite is there for, so whatever the data the end user is going to use. So that's how it's organized in terms of the taxonomy. And as you can imagine, right? So the bus, which is the control plane, you have like the GNC guidance, navigation, control systems, you have the antenna for the communications, then again, you have the avionics and the power. And on the payload side, so depending on what the satellite, what the mission is, right? So it can be EO, or it can be communications, GPS, or any other scientific research like telescopes and such. So as you can, I think I put this in here to give an idea of the complexity and the number of sensors and telemetry that's going to be generated. And okay, if we keep going on, yeah, so this is the satellite components. Now let's just talk about the ground station functions, right? And sorry, I know I could have put a slide for the ground station components, but it just maybe next time. All right, so let's talk about the ground station functions, right? So provide communications link to the satellite. That's how we communicate with the satellite, right? Otherwise, there's no way. So and by communications, what is accomplished, right? So command and control function, support mission control activities and support in-orbit satellite testing and such. So when we say command and control function, what are we talking about, right? So we talk about optimizing, maximizing performance of the satellite while it's there in its life cycle, right? So fuel efficiency, payload power output and such. So mission control activities is during the launch phase, injecting it or checking it out into the orbit and orbit raising and drift and such. So yeah, this is, again, I do 100% understand this is quite complicated. There's more depth to it, more technicality to it. But we are going, given the time constraints and just the theme for this, we're just getting an overview. All right, so continuing on, just taking one step further, right? Understanding, okay, what's telemetry, command, and ranging. So ranging is the distance between the ground station and the satellite at any given point. So continuing about the functions, right? And we are talking about this to see, why is it critical, and if it gets affected, what is going to get compromised, right? So the satellite health, so it's monitored, right? It monitors the telemetry, all the data that it gets, from the sensors. They're used to monitor this status, the health status of this, the spacecraft, the satellite, the monitoring, the movement, making sure the maneuvering, make sure it is in orbit, right? And orbit fluctuations and so this is about just making sure the satellite stays in its legit orbit and it's within maneuvering within the thresholds and such. Again, once again, I do understand this is complicated. This is like very specialized, but we are sort of just trying to get an overview, get some orientation around what the functions are. All right. So over here, so we're talking about the ground control architecture. So once again, say the same concepts of the bus and the payload, right? And over here, again, they're different, called by different names. We call it like mission control center, mission command and control center. But what is mostly involved is telemetry, tracking, guidance, navigation. And the core flight system is something that runs in the satellite or the spacecraft. So any of the telecommands and the telemetry happens between the ground station and the core flight systems interfacing subsystems up in the satellite. And this is the visual for it. If you can see, the green box is the ground control system. The blue is the satellite. The top half is the bus command and control. The bottom half is managing the payload, which is the end user data. Okay, so the life cycle of a satellite, right? So this is from design inception to decommissioning. Right? So design the satellite, manufacture it, launch, the launching, and all these people are different. Right? So the designing people are different, manufacturing people are different, could be the same. Launching people are different. So Yeah, so I believe the launch handoff happens once the satellite gets checked in or checked out into the orbit, and that's after that. That's where the ground station people take over. So that's this. Yeah, so today we're focusing more on the operations of once a satellite is up there, then what's the ground station's role in keeping the satellite there in its optimal path, position, function, and how can we secure it. All right, so from a NIST angle and even beyond NIST angle, so the whole space, and a lot of you folks might know this, so yeah, please bear with me if this is too elementary. So the space systems, right, how are they organized, like again, like taxonomically, from a taxonomy perspective. So you have the end users of the beneficiaries of the communications that are coming down from the satellites. Again, this is the payload side of things, the data side of things. So that's the user segment, which is all of us. And there's a NIST standard for it. It's called 8323. Okay. The other segment is a space segment, which is the satellite that itself. And then the spec for it is 8270. Again, it's I would say it's a standard. It's still being reviewed. IR is internal review. It's put in place. Currently, it's like a framework of best practice and such. And the third is the ground segment, and it's NIST 8401. Yeah, and please, don't ignore the not in scope and in scope. It's all right. So if we look at the user segment, so in the user segment framework, NIST framework 8323 it's a Rev 1 still, and so the focus is on, as I said earlier, provide the PNT part, like positioning, navigation, and timing service. This is it's just quite critical to industrial applications, cellular applications, because that's how they synchronize and time all their different end systems together. So for it to work accurately, there's very high dependency on the PNT. So yeah, that could, if that is affected, then it's going to affect how we communicate in our daily lives. So that's that. All right. So the space segment is not getting too much in detail in the space segment. It's like a very specialized. It pertains to how satellites communicate with each other using different communication methods, and that's out of scope. That was like beyond me to cover it. So all right, we'll keep going. All right. So finally, we come to the section that we're going to focus on more, which is the ground segment. It's 8401 is the name of the framework. All right. So so now so far, right, we spoke about the space economy, the space economy, right, and the factors that sort of are helping it grow. Then we spoke about the cyber threats. We went through the various segments, and now let's zoom into what NIST CSF framework is. So as I said, NIST is National Institute of Standards and Technology. So these are the people. It's an SDO, like standards development and organization. What they do is they spec out standards to help interoperability of different vendors for a certain technology to work, and so they have some frameworks and standards for cybersecurity. And let's just go over what a typical framework looks like, and it will hopefully it'll help. So yeah, and this is a little bit of theory in terms of the NIST framework. So a typical NIST framework is made up of 3 components: it tiers, the core function, and profile. And so what the tiers are, right? The tiers talk about how is the risk managed, right? The core functions are, how is it going to be implemented, or what is it going to be done? And profile is it's how do you spec it out how do you profile it depending on your particular organization? Let's dive a little bit deeper into this. So yeah, so when we talk about tiers, right, it determines your level of cyber resiliency for an organization. So if you look at the spectrum, it's from one through four, like so partially, you're sort of partially resilient up to four is you're adaptive. What that means is as the environment changes, your organization, like the technology, people, and processes are are at a level of excellence where they're quite adaptive. And of course, in between that, you have risk informed organizations and repeatable, where it's like a it's a degree of sophistication. It's a degree of excellence, if you want to say. And again, it's case by case. Every organization is different because there's a cost to manage the risk, maintain the risk. So sometimes it is possible, sometimes it's not. So the business factors are a big influence in this exercise. So yeah, that's the tiers. Now we get into the core components. So this is more relatable in terms of cybersecurity and securing and maintaining and managing, responding to. So all the NIST CSF frameworks are specced out or laid out or mapped out in these categories. So these are the functions. Okay, so first one is what processes and assets need to be protected, right? So it's the function is called identify. So what it means is, okay, first we need to identify the assets, and then are the assets worth what's the cost, what is it going to cost to protect, and is it worth it, and such. And and it includes all types of assets, right? Software, hardware, people, processes. And there's like more categories about like business environment, third party, other suppliers, what level of governance you have, risk assessment. Yeah, there's a whole program around it, right? So so once you have identified it, what needs to be protected, what's subjected to the risk and such. So that's identified. Then you start applying the functions of how do you protect it, right? So the biggest one is identity management, IAM, in terms of authorization, levels of authorization, rule-based access control. And this is all based around CIA in terms of like confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility of the data, which is like the basics of security of digital data and such. So as you this is quite intuitive. If you go down the list, right? You protect, and then your protect is all the mechanisms you have in place, right? And the third one is detect, is the ability to identify anything that's wrong. Hopefully you catch it before there's an incident. So there are a lot of tools available now. The cybersecurity industry is quite specialized and sophisticated in the last 3-4 years. So there's a field called MDR. So there's platforms, tools like manage, detect, and respond. They have quite a bit of AI-based functionality. What they do is, so one of the features they have is user behavioral analytics and such. So they'll train the systems on, hey, what does a typical day look like for the network usage, right? In terms of authorization, access, a day, a week, a month, for a certain user, for a certain department. And once that is baselined, then the system will be on the lookout for any anomalies. And if it senses one, it will flag it and maybe block that user. Say, for example, one example is, hey, you block, log into your computer, you start accessing it from Seattle at 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. There's same login detected somewhere on Southeast Asia, and immediately it'll be flagged as an anomaly, and it'll be blocked. And and then then you have the respond and recover functions. So this is, I'm thinking this is quite intuitive. I'll keep going forward. And then there's as you said, so there's the functions, there's the categories, and then the subcategories. So it keeps it's in terms of granularity, to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks and everything's identified, tracked, and managed. So this is the example over here is for the business environment, right? So the subcategory is, hey, the organization's role in the supply chain is identified and communicated. And again, so there are more risk compliance frameworks. So one that we're focused right now is NIST 800-53. But depending on what industry you are in, say if you are in the manufacturing, you have different. If you are in like gas and petroleum, you could have different frameworks. All right, so let's keep going. So what is the profile, right? So the profile is, once the business folks give their priorities of say budgeting, right? So what's the budget for securing all these assets and such. So you take that and then you consider, okay, what are the resource availability, what are the requirements from say regulatory requirements from the industry or from the customers. You take all this together, right? Put it in a blender, boom, and you get a smoothie of like cybersecurity profile. Right? This is what a profile looks like, and it can be a current snapshot, or you can develop it for the state that you want it, and that's what typically it's done, the state, and then you work towards it. You come up with a roadmap for get to that state, which while reducing your cyber risk as much as possible. So this is general theory around cybersecurity frameworks as per from the NIST world. And so this goes further down into identify function, right? So identify the business operations environments, right? The assets, hardware, software, infrastructure that provides a ground control functionality. And okay, same. So once you've identified, right, then protect the functions, right? So this is a good point over here. So say for example, right, so you want to protect that the systems, that the commands that are sent from the ground station to the satellite have a certain level of assurance. So what does that mean, right? So it's been tested. Again, this is a little bit for inadvertent stuff. It's been tested in an environment before it's deployed. And so there's a little bit of nuance or a little bit of detailing over here. Is so even if there's an error between the satellite, or if the communications, if there's some problem, and there is some how the software systems work, right? So there's log generated and there's alarms generated. So there's sensitivity around protecting those. There's sensitivity around not sending those logs or alarms in like clear text, because they can be hacked. So that's one of the typical ways hackers, they try some commands and they see, oh, what error message are they getting, and then look at the error message, then they tweak their next attempts, and they get better at it. So so you need to make sure that all the alarming system, all the command system is protected. And so protecting the system that receive, and that's what we talked about, telemetry. Should a threat be realized, protecting the ground systems to maintain a sufficient level of operation. So this is more along the lines of have policies, procedures. So this is more along the zoomed out concept of the people, technology, and the process all working together. So, okay, let's move on to the next one. So detecting, right? So have, monitoring systems in place that would detect, hopefully they would capture any anomaly and and pass it on to the operations team. And usually they have like standard operating procedures to react to certain like step 1, step 2, step 3, and different response times, or get their engineering team or even get the design team involved and such. Yeah, so respond is, again, right, if there's an issue, then hey, do you have like the incident response plan? Do you have like a backup disaster recovery plan? Do you have like a business continuity plan? So the thought process, the philosophy is the same. And yeah, it just needs to be like tweaked or applied to the space, in terms of like the satellite and mission command control systems. All right, so if we keep, and this is the last one is recover. So in the case of an incident, then there needs to be like procedures in place to bring back the satellite to an optimal working position, status, and make sure everything is operational. And just lessons learned, incorporate them again into the technology process people aspect of the day-to-day. All right, so I hope this was helpful somewhat, because this is quite vast area, right? It's a huge field by itself. There's it's a dedicated science, dedicated engineering domain, and so my objective here was to just give an overview and see and see how the NIST framework could be helpful in putting arms around any threat aspects, and identify them and be proactive. So yeah, and to make this a little bit more relatable, let's just go through. Yeah, we have a demo system here running, and we have some good visuals also. So yes, where did it go? Okay, here it is. All right. So this is so hopefully the theory that we went through in terms of telemetry, telecommands. So this is what and this is simulation. So this is simulation, right? So this is so these are the links. So we have a simulation running now, which is generating packets, and over here we see the packet counters. And I know this is not a super, there's not too much intelligence. Okay, let's look at the telemetry part. So these are each of the packets. And so the point of showing this, right, is the point of sharing this is, so this is the type of data that the hackers are looking for. If you look here on the right side, and yeah, and they're smart enough, or they have the tools to detect, to have a way to read this, right, and reverse engineer. If this was, especially as I was talking, if this was like a log error, and they would be able to reverse engineer, or what is the problem, and I mean that's an opportunity. So okay, all right, so over here, so the command, okay, so this is, and again say like reboot it, and of course, right, there's this is a very a basic rendition of this is how maybe reboot a system in the satellite, right? So this is the reason to show this, is to communicate that it's the functionalities are basic on the ground station side, and if the hackers get access to it, then they're gonna and they don't even need a UI, right? Because there's a server running behind us that's doing the CLI in scripts and such. So yeah, so this is this, and let's look at this is the mission database. It includes, okay, these are all the parameters. As we went through all the sensors, right, for the bus and the payload, And so, they would be captured all over here, right? So this is the navigation and the guidance part, the lat long and gyros specifications. And yeah, so the data is quite critical, sensitive. Yeah, and CCDS, so this is something CCSDS I was gonna cover, but just didn't have enough time. So CCSDS is for people who are familiar with TCP/IP and IP world. So just like a packet has a structure, right? It has like a frame at layer 2, then a packet at layer 3. I keep on adding headers to it to make it to make it usable, right? So like source IP, destination IP, source port, destination port, checksum error, and all that stuff. So as it's spec'd out for enterprise IT, so the space people have something called a CCSDS standards, which spec out the structure of a packet. And and if just so now the hackers are sophisticated so they craft packets for hacking into regular IT. And the same people, once they're enough motivated, they have the resources, they could just craft the packets for like CCSDS also. And yep. So that's it from my side. If there's any Q&A, and maybe write Mike for later sessions, so we can cover. There is a framework around MITRE attack framework, which is different than NIST. But again, it could be like another presentation by itself. The Sparta is the Space Corporation has come up with it. And with that, I'll stop sharing and we can chat. Was it helpful, my friend?
That was great, Abhi.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, good stuff. Are there any questions that folks in our audience have?
Abhi, I had a question that came to my mind is there an example of an attack that stands out? I mean, what in your memory of all of attacks and whatnot on satellites, what's been the worst or most egregious one? I'm sure it happens all the time, and I'm sure they're probably pretty gnarly. I'm guessing.
Yeah. So yeah, you'd be surprised. No, thank you for asking that question. Right. So you'd be surprised, right? In terms of so yes, right. So the sophistication and the complexity is there, right? So the sophistication is there, which sort of evokes the sense of awe in us for the for the other party. But you'd be surprised, the reason it happens a lot of the times it happens is so until now, so to so ground station, right? So a lot of the ground stations still run equipment that was it's outdated. Okay, so that's what happened with the Viasat also in Ukraine. So the modems and the equipment that they had was outdated, right? So the firmware was not updated, so it was easy for the hackers to get in. And the minimum, this was the MTT, minimum time to repair, and there's another metric like the minimum time. I think the minimum time to this minimum time to identify. Okay, it's like 3 to 4 months. So it takes like 4 months for an organization to identify that they are hacked, right? So by that time they've gotten like a lot of intel. And yeah, so to answer your question, right? Sorry to sort of unpack it in a maybe in a not very spectacular way. But what happened in Russia, right? Which is in Ukraine, which is like quite common because the systems are outdated. And most of these are like industrial control systems. So they hack into it. And so when you say hack, right, it's mostly like communications. The first part is communication, getting to it, right? Getting to it. And the way to get to it is, again, not like super spectacular, right? The means of getting to it is, have an employee sort of, click on a like phishing link and provide, the credentials, and probably they use the same credentials for logging into their systems. So something along, yeah. So those, it's a very, it's a very process oriented exercise. But at the end of the day, right, it is for us, for a normal human being, it's quite spectacular. It is, but it's just, the tenacity of the hackers is quite a bit, and that's why just, it forces us or drives us to stay on top of our toes and stay, on top of the vulnerabilities. So a lot of the systems, I'd say most of the systems, industrial control systems, non-industrial control systems, so they're coded on open source, right? And open source is open source, right? It has a lot of vulnerabilities. And if you look at the list of CVEs, which is vulnerability entities, it is like I think 1,800 or so open source entities. They're still out there, so it's just a matter of who's going to be motivated enough to go after it. And yeah, did that answer your question, my friend? I just sort of rambled.
No, that's fine. My question was, just as a reminder, was just an example of an attack and kind of where they came in or how, or again, I was looking for the most like crazy attack or the worst damage based on attacks. I mean, I just have to imagine that this infrastructure matters so much, and that people getting in and bumming around sucks. But then again, it's like some are, weapon systems, and some are just used for, plain Jane, no big deal.
Yeah. So let me, okay, no, you're right. So most of that we hear are get on the radar are due to the spectacularness of the outcome, right? How the damage. So in case of like defense systems and such, right? So it's not that common. It's not that common, right? Because the resources needed are quite significant in terms of if you had to jam a satellite with with high power RF. So it can only be done, it can only be meaningfully done by nation states who would have that level of motivation and that level of resources. Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Patrick.
Michael,
Hey.
Oh,
welcome.
sorry. What's his last name?
I would politely disagree. The U.S. Navy a couple of years ago in town here sponsored a competition to hack into the data links of one of their Aegis cruisers parked at Bremerton. They left at the dockside. There's probably about 50, 60 graybeards, the guys that sit in the back of the room with the long beard. And apparently, in the course of about 8 hours, they were able to penetrate into the, via from dockside into the communication system of the cruiser, and then infiltrate the cruiser's data links to the satellites. So what I'm disagreeing with is that it requires a nation state. And although those guys look strange, they weren't nation states. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what Abhi was talking about is if you were to do an RF-based attack to deny a satellite, but obviously dedicated hackers can find all ways into systems.
Yeah. And it depends on thank you, Michael. So thank you, right? So so it depends on what are you attacking in terms of like the threat surface, and what are you trying to achieve. So anything meaningful in terms of say what Russia did to Ukraine and such. So that's so the amount of resources needed would be more over there. But if it's something like super specific and something smaller scale, which of course could, snowball into
Become
something larger. That could be a starting point. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good one. And yeah, so every year, right? So that's a good one. So every year, the DEF CON in the US, right? So there's a DEF CON conference in Vegas. So they do have hack-a-sat events. So there's actually a satellite in the orbit, which is put in place for this purpose by the USSF. And same thing with the ESA, even the European Space Agency, even they have like a similar thing. They call it OPSAT, and and these are helpful initiatives to learn how to access them and how to do bad things to them.
I had a follow-on question so as the commercial space industry is taking off, there's all sorts of companies, and what everybody's trying for is modular architectures, where, hey, a generic bus and some generic radios and generic that you can mix and match these to come up with whatever size platform, whatever, standard Lego plug and play. And doesn't that lower the threshold? Because if they can hack one, do they get the full meal deal after they've been successful with one system? Now all the others are, correspondingly vulnerable.
Yeah. So this is a good point, right? So this calls for, right, the design in depth perspective and philosophy of segmenting the network in such a way, if one of the systems is what's the word, right? If one of the systems is compromised, one of the subsystems compromised, then the damage would be controlled. And so this is where it goes back to revisiting the older designs and respecing them out, using proper network segmentation. And you are like, 100% agree, right? So a lot of it's squats earlier, right? So earlier there were just a few resource rich nations that could had access to space, but now with the ability of using COTS, right? So commercially off the shelf, resource, compute, network. I even want to share something over here, right? So you'd be surprised. So this is, I've shown this to my colleague Warren over here. So this is something called as like a tiny GPS. It runs on LoRa on 433 megahertz, and this is all this needs, right? All it needs is it needs like USB-CC. I connect this to my computer, and this is the antenna that I need, and it connects to so there's a network of LoRa ground stations which have accessibility to certain LoRa satellites, but this is just like one-way communications. And so let me share my screen. So it's become very easy, and this cost me less than $50. And so the point that Michael made about the usage of commercially off-the-shelf products. And so this is it. So this is this is call it like tiny ground station. This is all the ground stations that are running in this area, and this is a certain network, and it's very limited, and they have access to the LoRa satellites, and here are the packets that they're getting. Let's look at this one, right? So just got it like a few seconds ago, and it's sharing all the all the telemetry and the parameters around it in terms of the inclination, the power, and these are these are the active satellites. But again, this is like a one-way communication. But this again, sort of corroborates Michael's point that it's become like super accessible, off the shelf stuff you can buy on Amazon, and put this together and yeah, and learn. So we are doing this to learn, and space is new for us. So our expertise is cybersecurity and IT and other use cases such as autonomous vehicles. So cybersecurity is new for us, and this is how we are learning. This is how we are learning in terms of putting our own lab together. Yeah, but that is a good point, Michael. Warren, you have something to say, my friend?
No, thank you very much. You're taking all the hits and helping, I think, bring some visibility into a incredibly complex set of variable requirements across the incredible expanse of satellite communications. I'm a commercial comms guy, and all the amazing things now with Earth observation and securing data, both for, in my world, we secure data for digital rights management. In the world of both military and Earth observation for commercial purposes, the data is worth money. I mean, it's the value is the data itself and the refined data. So it's a huge field, and I think it's certainly not getting less complicated. It's getting more complicated, year over year. So it's going to take your generation of contributors. I think I'm probably the oldest guy sitting here on this podcast, but I think it's I started off in space 1.0 or maybe even space 0. Whatever, but we're now in what we've quickly gone through space 2.0, in my opinion, and we're in a whole new level of exciting time. So anything to provide deeper visibility into that complexity to practitioners, which you're taking the pains to do, I really appreciate and think it's very, very valuable.
So I had a question in regard, sort of a big picture kind of question. So NIST obviously has been working overtime, putting out security standards of all shapes and sizes, probably for the past 20 years now. But there's like this, is there really any distinction between, say, a defense satellite and civilian space infrastructure? What is your opinion? Is it going to eventually be that the DoD or federal government simply says you have to meet these standards for safe operation in orbit, not unlike hitting Musk for unsafe operation of a rocket off a launch pad, right? It's an inherent safety aspect to the public. So are they going to get their nose further into the tent? And because is there really any difference between them?
Yeah, so this is a good question, right? So the tricky part over here is the satellites, right? Like the traverse across the boundaries, and Warren, so maybe you could add more value or valuable response.
I just realized I might have remuted. Did you guys hear my diatribe a few minutes ago?
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just not your background noise.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I weighed in here a few minutes ago, but I realized my stupid desktop remuted me. No,
please diatribe.
So I was basically lamenting the fact and thanking this kind of an organization for helping bring the next generation of practitioners into awareness of just the extraordinarily expanding complexity, which kind of overlays your question about the DoD to us. I've built my entire career on commercializing things that were DoD secret sauces 10 or 15 years after they didn't care anymore. So it's been good to me. In terms of the current situation, I recently was responding to one of the U.S. Space Force cyber proposals, and we had to give a list of all the things that we thought would add value to what the request for information was about. And I decided I haven't looked into what's publicly available about what's going on behind the curtain for the satellite. The newest information I could find was 2007 releases about stuff that's probably not even in use anymore. So overhead is all kinds of incredibly cool stuff that we have no idea what's there and what it can do. Although we know it has extraordinarily on Earth observation, optical and multi frequency and multi sensor data packages of every type and kind of extremely high resolution. So, they started 25 years ago with the big red eye to look for ICBM launches. And, they now can probably find somebody striking a match to light a cigarette, probably anywhere they want to know. So in terms of the government regulatory environment, it's really kind of fascinating. The global satellites and non-geosynchronous satellites, by definition, have to be licensed through the ITU, because no single nation state can provide the authority to regulate a global system. So no individual or company can file for an NGSO license. You have to be sponsored by a nation state. So looking at these, Abhi introduced me to these low-RAW satellites. I had no idea we were doing low-RAW from space. I thought it was hilarious. So here we are with these, low VHF satellites that are essentially experimental satellites running incredibly low powers, into tiny little Earth stations like you saw that Abhi showed a while ago. And it's an experiment. He's looking obviously to try and get experience on, what are the packets oriented like? What are the different, headers and footers, and how is the information, being delivered? These are more just RF testing and packet data testing. They're not really commercial low raw IoT things like we'd see on the terrestrial low raw system. But what an amazing magic trick to do a freaking low raw from space is just beyond cool. And so back to your question, that's about as democratized as you're going to get from a satellite to a end user, completely outside the framework of traditional regulatory. These are unlicensed bands. The launch had to be licensed. Obviously, they put a piggyback on some major launch and they got it up into low Earth orbit. The ones, I think, Abhi, it's a Chinese. The one you were showing was Chinese. I think there's a Russian one, and then there's several US ones and an Italian one. So it's become quite a thing. But I think it's demonstrative of the fact that, the democratization of space, or the expansion of commercial and different ways to exploit and utilize space, is fantastic. It's a brave new world, and I think all the excitement about the space 2.0 world, which I think we're rapidly going to blow through 2.0 and be into space 3.0, because we're suddenly going to run smack dab into the biggest problem that is the 900-pound gorilla in the room, which is orbital debris. And you can't have CubeSats flying around at 15,000 miles an hour that are non-navigable. They will run into things eventually. And a friend of mine was telling me, when I was amazed at just how much stuff is flying around and how few collisions there are. And he says, it's just like, airplanes and VFR aircraft. The only reason we have so few mid-air collisions is because the sky is so big. And it's exactly the same thing. Space is big, and even at every orbital shell, it's still a massive environment. But the issues, and back to the issues of regulatory oversight, I think orbital debris and the fact that historically space communications relied on orthogonal separation between different orbital locations. So geosatellites were separated by, typically 5 degrees, and you reused all the spectrum every 5 degrees around the geosynchronous arc. Now that we're up into the LEO constellations and things are flying around in in multiple planes, and especially the high density ones like Starlink and Kuiper, both sharing geosynchronous fixed satellite service KU band. Those guys are building a Faraday cage around the world for that frequency, and anybody above their altitude is going to have an impossible time trying to coordinate orthogonal separation. You can't. So the interference is going to become a big deal. So I think there's going to be an interesting commercial headbutting session. The work just ignored it. That we just finished every 4 year the World Administrative Radio Congress. They didn't even talk about it hardly at all.
Really?
So it's kind of like burying your head in the sand because it's so cool with all the big money that's flying into Leo, but there's going to be some interesting challenges before it's over. End of diatribe.
Well, my concern or whatever, being a bitter, cynical, sarcastic old person, is that
I'm a happy cynic. That's how I think about it.
Is it eventually something happens and then they try to solve it through legislation, right?
Oh yeah, after the fact,
and
yeah.
then
Way
the
after the fact.
ham-fist effort comes in, just like
absolutely
with our pilot shortage, right? The stupid congressional law has almost destroyed the aviation industry.
Yep.
And NIST, it remains fairly apolitical, etc. The DoD kind of keeps narrow focus on protecting their own stuff, but there doesn't seem to be anybody like making some reasonable suggestions about securing all of that infrastructure. And even if you wanted to, where would you go to get best practices, case studies, etc.?
And I think that's what I'm so proud of Abhi and the rest of you guys in the next generations of practitioners are you're taking the NIST framework and bringing it into practice. So you're actually creating methods and procedures and protocols that are based on operational, not just bureaucratic, checkbox review stuff.
Yeah, it was kind of funny when you mentioned, like an RF denial attack on a satellite, and immediately my squirrel cage is going like, okay, how would I do that?
Well,
yeah, if I had 500 acres someplace, could I build a phaser, a steerable beam antenna that could focus enough on one satellite through its pass over to be able to do that? And my feeling is, yes, certainly I could.
You absolutely could, right up until the FBI knocked on your door. That's absolutely correct.
I'm wondering if there's questions from some of our other folks, June or Keith, Rizwan, Daniel. Good to have you guys with us.
Hey, I got one. This is Nathan. Thanks for the topic. And I was really looking forward to that. So recently, last month, I got my Security Plus certification, and I'm henceforth trying to break into the cyber field. So I just was curious if you have any tips. I'm mid-career engineer, but I'm still looking at satellite industry, and I think security is still going to be a pretty big deal. But breaking in to the field, like anyone, I think that's a common position, is just getting in the spot. So if you have any tips, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so if I was to respond to this, so the satellite industry is not, it's not standardized, or it's not operationalized. I'd say not standardized, and the security function is almost like non-existent over there. So a good place to start might be just the regular enterprise, because it's the concepts are still the same. It's just like different domain. And yeah, and just getting, hands-on experience wherever you can in terms of just, open up your command prompt and just put the netstat and, see what you see. It's just mind-boggling, right? So, if you go here, just do command prompt and sorry, okay, I just have to do this. Okay, that's the and boom, see these are all the connections that are going out. These are all established connections from my laptop and out to the server. So there's a lot of applications that are running in the background. And it's just and being able to capture packets. And I know this I'm talking like in weeds, but this is being able to learn like TCP dumps, capture packets, and read them and analyze them in Wireshark. I think that's the first step. And probably you might have covered this in your certification, but anything practical, you can just be able to capture just packets going on your laptop or computer. A good place to start, right? And then the enterprise IT, because it's much more standardized, because there's like thousands and thousands of customers who are buying security services as compared to the satellite world, right? There's not that many of Did that help, my friend? Just
Yeah, absolutely.
I-
Thank you.
I would think another place, Abhi, you might remind them about USSF's incredible net they're casting on new ideas and talent, just even as a place to get a lot of far field visibility into some of the things that are going on, because they have no mission defined yet. They're spending massive amounts of money on trying to talk to people like us to get good ideas about things they ought to know about.
Yeah. So absolutely, right. So yeah, just like Mike and company is like Space Northwest. So Mike, what is that? The MAC people, Mission Acceleration
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
see, they're running those programs, right? In a way, like the CYBER, CYBER and the STTRs and such.
So if for the past couple of years, about 4 or 5 years, I've been participating in the National Security Innovation Network. And along that path, I think one's focused on cybersecurity. And if you want to get to know people and what the terrain looks like, it's awesome. The ones they're usually about a week, sometimes 10 days, virtually online. You talk directly to the subject matter experts, right? So the guys from Space Command and the Navy cybersecurity guys, etc. And in addition to that, they have all sorts of other longer, shorter sorts of competitions, etc. And even though I ain't all that interested in cybersecurity, just by osmosis, I seem to have picked up a fair amount of knowledge about it. But also the professional network, the people, the mentors in the competitions, the judges have all been very helpful. So the Ensign is now part of DUI, Defense something or other for Defense Unit for Innovation, and they have a local office here called the Mission Accelerator Center, which deals with DoD startups and ideas and things like that. And occasionally they have events where you can come and meet the local people doing that sort of thing. So I found it really, really fun and interesting, because like the Navy sponsored one on how to gamify cybersecurity, because on their ships and stuff, it's like, the years and years of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror.
Yeah.
So how you get, a watched pot never boils, right?
Yeah.
And this was defeating them. And so they decided, well, what if we kind of have an overlay going at the same time they're doing their ordinary monitoring that was equivalent to World of Warcraft or something like that would keep the attention span up, right? And then have a reward system attached to it. It was really fascinating. what
So-
people cook about.
So, Nathan, I dropped the link to the pnwmac.org in the chat. So you can check them out.
Got it.
MAC and Pacific Northwest Defense Coalition, PMDC, have been great partners with Space Northwest. And MAC is where we had space apps this past year, and Techstars Startup Weekend before that.
Great.
Expect to see more programs that we do there this year. All right, I'm just going to steal the screen back for just a minute. This has been fantastic conversation, but we're almost out of time, if you can believe it. So give me just 1 second. Just to let everyone know, our next meetup is going to be on the 29th of February. We are working on a possible presenter for that. But in the meantime, if you have your own topic that you'd like to see covered on Space Data Hackers, let us know. Go to the meetup or send a message to info@spacenorthwest.org, and we'll put it in consideration. So I just want to wrap up by thanking Abhi for giving the talk, and Vern for also being a part of this and going really into the deep dive. This is fantastic. Great way to kick off the new year with an awesome topic, great presenters, and looking forward to all the stuff that we're going to see in the future. Hope you'll join us. And thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Right. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
Good job, Ollie.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Abhi.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Right.
Thank you for the kind words.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.